I'm really delighted to be able to introduce Wayne for the session this morning. So Wayne is a professional officer from BASW. Wayne is also a social worker with lots of experience. Wayne has worked with children, young people and families, care leavers, offenders, people with mental health issues. So a really broad range of experience. And I've been very aware of Wayne's work. So there's lots of resources that you can have a look at that Wayne has produced, which are very, very useful. So today, Wayne's going to be talking about the Shades of Bias tool. I'm not going to say any more about it because I'm sure Wayne will be able to explain it an awful lot better than I will. So I'm going to hand over to yourself, Wayne. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Carolyn, and good morning to Somerset colleagues. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you this morning. My name is Wayne Reid. I'm a professional officer and social worker from BASW, as Carolyn was just saying. And I'm going to speak to you this morning about Shades of Bias, which is a resource that we've developed. I hope you can see that okay?
Yeah, we can see it great.
Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. The slogan for Shades of Bias is reveal, reflect and repair, and hopefully that will become clear as I progress through the presentation. Firstly, just a quick slide on my social work background. As Carolyn was just saying, it's been quite a diverse professional history that I've had, from working in private fostering at the bottom to working with adult offenders on an intensive supervision and surveillance programme in the community, and also involved quite a lot of court work as well, to working with young offenders in similar settings in both the community and in courts. I've also worked with adults with mental health issues who have had long-standing and enduring mental health issues, both in the community and in terms of interventions. I've worked as a child protection duty and assessment officer also. Those were student placements, I need to just highlight as well. I've also worked with care leavers as a young person's advisor and supporting them with their post-16 education, training and employment and housing and so on. I worked as a supervising social worker for roughly 8 years for a different private fostering agency, supporting foster carers from the point of interest in fostering to assessment, to having their first children in placement, annual reviews and so on. I've worked at BASW now for just over 8 years, and a few years ago I had a secondment at BASW focusing specifically on anti-racism, but my substantive role is as a professional officer and social worker. And I've been back in my substantive role now for a good few years, but 8 years in total at BASW. So that's just a bit about me. My organisation then, the British Association of Social Workers, is a professional association for social workers in the UK, and we were established in 1970. We're a member-led organisation which promotes social work, the interests of those working within the profession, and people who use services. And we have roughly 22,000 members across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And we pride ourselves on being the strong, independent voice of social work and social workers. And you'll see there our logos that we've had over the decades. I wanted to just give you a brief insight into some of the work streams that we're involved in at BASW, so you get some idea of where Shades of Bias sits when I come to that. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the Codes of Ethics for social work, the PCF, which is the Professional Capabilities Framework. There are hyperlinks throughout this presentation, so when you get your copy of this, you'll be able to look at some of this information in more detail. We also collaborate with employers, education providers, service user groups, and other national, local and regional stakeholders. We have a range of specialist national thematic groups which focus on different social work specific areas, such as children and families, adults, mental health, criminal justice, and students and newly qualified social workers, as well as professional development. All of those groups are national groups, and they all cover policy, practice and education within their specific remits. We also have an established network of branches nationwide. There's lots of events that we host, both online and in person, a range of conferences and webinars also. We have a policy and research team that works directly with universities and other higher education institutes and researchers and so on. And we have liaison with the social work regulator, Social Work England, and I lead on that for BASW England. And I'll not cover all of these verbatim, but I wanted to just highlight some of the other workstream areas as well, which again you'll be able to look at when you get your copy of this presentation. But fundamentally, we're about promoting a collective professional identity for social workers. So if you're not currently a member, please consider joining, and I'm happy to have any conversations with people offline as well. So in terms of what you can expect from my presentation this morning, I'll talk to you about what shades of bias is, what its origins are, how it can be utilised more widely. I'll explore with you the section specifically for people responsible for bias and what they can gain. I'll then summarise and provide some infographics, which I hope consolidate what I've said. And if we have time, I will also look at an exemplar with you, so an example of how the template has been completed, but they are available online. I'll also then signpost you to relevant BASW England work streams, frameworks and resources that interrelate with shades of bias. And there'll be opportunity for questions at the end. And I will pause throughout as well to invite questions as well, so you're not just listening to my Yorkshire twang constantly throughout this presentation. So what is shades of bias? It's a versatile case study template designed to enable critical reflection on how discrimination, oppression and racism manifests in social work and beyond. It's a simple process for documenting, analysing and addressing instances of bias, whether it is experienced directly, observed or perpetrated by the person or people responsible. Shades of bias embraces intersectionality, and it's underpinned by the protected characteristics, including age, race, disability, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. And that's of the author or user of shades of bias, as per the Equality Act 2010. The template also captures more nuanced and multi-layered discrimination, such as classism, microaggressions, neurodiversity, sexism, etc. Based on anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive and anti-racist values and ethics, Shades of Bias helps to create a culture of accountability, inclusion, self-expression and systemic change. Shades of Bias is more than just a tool for documenting racism, and I really need to emphasise that. It is a multidimensional framework for healing, self-examination and transformation across policy, practice and education. Shades of Bias provides cathartic and therapeutic benefits, which empowers people to analyse and respond to experiences of bias and various forms of discrimination. By validating lived experiences, Shades of Bias is both a self-help resource and a practical tool, giving it a unique emotional and strategic function aimed at hearts and minds. It's intended for Shades of Bias to become the standardised framework for documenting discrimination and exposing harmful systemic patterns that are often ignored. And I want to just mention that clearly you'll see the definition of bias that we're working with there in the bottom left-hand corner, but throughout that slide are some of the definitions also via the hyperlinks in terms of microaggressions, anti-discrimination and so on. And that is quite a wordy slide, so thank you for bearing with me. Here is an image that I hope consolidates the values and ethics that we've integrated into Shades of Bias. So it serves three different groups. The first group are victims, survivors of discrimination, oppression and racism. And what they can gain are cathartic and therapeutic benefits, as I was saying on the last slide. So for people who've experienced discrimination, oppression or racism, Shades of Bias offers a way to process and validate their experiences, reducing the fear of dismissal or gaslighting. Writing about these incidents can help release emotional distress, allowing people to articulate their feelings in a constructive way. It helps victims and survivors make sense of what's happened, recognise patterns of discrimination, and to regain a sense of control over the narrative. By documenting their experiences, individuals can create a tangible record of injustice, which can be used to seek accountability, support, and/or systemic change. This approach reduces isolation as individuals see their experiences reflected in broader structural patterns rather than as personal failures or isolated incidents. It's also imperative that victims and survivors of discrimination, oppression and racism access appropriate wellbeing networks, such as BASW England's mentoring service, our professional support service, There's also the anti-racism movement and local peer support groups. It's also important that people access wellbeing resources such as the relational and anti-racist supervision template. There's some guidance that we've produced in terms of advice and representation for social workers. There's the professional working conditions and wellbeing campaign that BASW has had for many years now. And there's also many resources on the Black and Ethnic Minority Professional Symposium's webpage, and also School of Shabs, who are a contributor to developing this resource. The next group that Shades of Bias supports are witnesses and observers, and they can feel empowered through ethical accountability. People who witness discrimination, oppression and racism often feel uncertain about how to intervene. Shades of Bias provides a proactive method to acknowledge and challenge effectively. Witnesses and observers can document incidents without putting themselves at risk, ensuring that discrimination, oppression and racism does not go unnoticed and/or become normalised. Observers can contribute to a growing body of evidence that reveals patterns of systemic injustice professionally and in wider society. Shades of Bias supports active social justice, helping witnesses move from silent and passive observance to meaningful action. For many witnesses, speaking up against discrimination, oppression and racism can be intimidating or professionally risky. Shades of Bias provides a safe, structured way to record and report incidents, making systemic change more achievable. And the final group that Shades of Bias supports are the people or person responsible for the bias. And for them, it's a tool for accountability, critical reflection and growth. Even well-intentioned people can exhibit bias. Shades of Bias provides a logical, non-punitive method for people to reflect on their own actions, inactions and biases. People responsible for the bias are encouraged to analyse their decision-making and behaviours, recognising how instinctive and impulsive biases can influence professional judgment. By completing the template from their own perspective, people can confront how and why they perpetuated discrimination, oppression or racism and commit to learning and change. This process aims to convert guilt into being responsible and shame into taking accountability, cultivating a culture of growth rather than defensiveness. This approach helps to shift from a blame culture to a learning culture, where people actively deconstruct bias and commit to authentic and holistic social justice. So again, thank you for bearing with that wordy slide, but I hope the three groups there are clear in terms of what Shades of Bias serves. I also want to underline at this point that the starting point with Shades of Bias is that as human beings, we're all susceptible to bias, myself included. It's a sort of human trait. So Shades of Bias is an opportunity really for people to reflect on and explore the biases that they may have been a victim of, that they've witnessed, or that they may have perpetrated, sometimes even unwittingly, retrospectively. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm happy to invite any questions at this point if there are any. Can't see any hands up. Okay, so I shall move on. So next I want to share with you just the headlines from the template itself. I can see somebody's got their hand up there, so I will come to them in a moment, but as I've started, I'll just finish. So yes, I wanted to just cover I'll give you an overview of the template itself without actually showing you the template, which is available online. It has self-explanatory headings, the first being the case study title. So the scenario itself, this is an opportunity for the user of the form to give that scenario a title. And then the next headings are for the user to outline the background and context to the scenario using either the prompts that are there, or there may be additional prompts that they want to use. They might think some of those prompts there are, kind of irrelevant, so they could remove those if they like. So it really is quite flexible in that regard. So it's really just a starter, some of these prompts. The next heading is the nature of the event. It's an opportunity there for the person just to use those prompts there, just to outline what the nature of the incident was. The next couple of sections, so the next is how was the situation handled? And then There's also an opportunity for reflection and learning. So you can see, depending on the perspective that somebody will be coming from, either as a victim or survivor, or a witness or observer, at this point, there's different ways that somebody might complete the form. The next section is specifically for the person responsible for bias. So although the previous headings are also relevant, this is a section specifically for people completing the form from that perspective, and some prompts there to assist them with doing that. And then there is scope for other comments or reflections that there might be. Shades of Bias is a practical, structured and reflective tool that empowers and equips people. Unlike many reports that merely outline problems or recommend solutions that are not implemented, Shades of Bias is a universal template to document, analyse and support people in real-world scenarios. If people completing the form would like to share their completed case study with us, we are collating some of those. We have an online version of the form, as well as a PDF version and a Word version, which can be adapted. People can submit their completed forms anonymously if they like, and we have talked about developing a publication of some sort in the future where we might anonymously publish people's submissions as well. We're not 100% committed to that at this stage, but there have been discussions about that. So people can send their submissions directly to me, or they can use the online form that's available via the Shades of Bias webpage. Or they may just decide to complete a version of the form and use it privately for their own personal use. And again, that's fine. Alternatively, somebody might use it as part of a process, whether that be supervision or team meeting or a complaint or a disciplinary matter, perhaps. So there's multiple different uses for it, which I'll talk about later on in this presentation. But I know people have been waiting patiently there with their hands up, so I'd like to come to those questions or comments now, please.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for this topic. And I want to say that I love the way the topic was actually wired, being Shades of Bias conversation. You made mention in your introduction that even for the observer, when trying to resolve a conflict, they are not intentionally going out there to be biased, but in how, the process are and everything. So my question is, having recognized that there may be shades of biases, don't you think that we need to have a reflection on how some of these questions are actually set out so that it can reduce it? I won't say that it won't be there, because as human, elimination can be very, very small. But if the form are so fair, as we say, fair, it may actually reduce this biases even coming into place. That's my own opinion. In the past, we've seen some shortcomings with some forms, with some questions. Now that we recognize that this thing may come up, don't you think that we need to go back to the drawing board and then reflect on some of these questions that are asked? Because now you have been able to stratify different people in different boxes. The first one, the individual in questions, the observer and everything. So if we know those categories of people, then we need to consider some of these questions so that the biases may be reduced or over time can be eliminated. Thank you.
Thank you, Funmi. I mean, that sounded like a comment, an opinion and a question rolled into one. So I'm going to try and respond to that best I can. What you said about going back to the drawing board around some of this, I think I agree. I mean, some of what you said was actually a very good advert, I think, for Shades of Bias in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And it is about going back to the drawing board, I guess, as and when scenarios unfold where there are suspicions or examples of bias. And Shades of Bias is, kind of able to hopefully support those three different users in going back to the drawing board as and when those scenarios happen. I don't think I can really say much more than that, really. Obviously, in the current climate, the dial on the hostile environment, I guess, has just gone up, really, in many ways. So I see sort of more of a window and opportunity and scope for shades of bias really in the current climate. So I hope that people find it beneficial, both professionally and personally. Thank you for your comments there. So I shall move on. The next slide is an infographic just to reiterate what shades of bias is, what it's about, and what its objectives are, who it serves, and so on. I'll give you a moment just to digest that. Are there any questions or comments that people have in relation to its purpose or the people it serves, the process itself, or the provision of the resource? And no question's a silly question as far as I'm concerned.
I think I like how it's going to be covering a lot of different areas. So there's space for reflection, so supporting people that have been victims, but there's also witnesses as well as to how they handle the situation and you know what actions they might need to take afterwards, etc. And also for those acknowledging that they may have had some bias and sort of critically reflected on those. But by acknowledging the bias or recording the scenarios, the situations and that have happened, how they've made people feel, and then subsequent actions that might have been taken as a result, you know, can directly influence policy and ongoing practice as well. So I think, you know, it's going to be a really useful resource for capturing kind of what's going on really and what people within the organisation are facing. We have another hand up. So it's Jabenga.
Good morning is quite an interesting topic which also put ones on his toes, really. My question would be, where lies the issue of conscious bias in this scenario? Sometimes if we are too conscious, sometimes then abnormal sensitivity, sometimes in a way, sorry for that use of word, in decision makings, which you have to make a decision. So where lies such in this scenario?
Was it reference to sensitivities there, Gobenga, that you were referring to, and the inherent nature of bias?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for your question. I think as I mentioned that I believe, and the premise of shades of bias is based on the fact that we all have bias as human beings, and there are pros and cons to that, which I think you highlight there. As part of everyday decision making and professional judgment, you know, we have to make decisions, we have to do assessments and so on. And so there's an element of bias being integrated within that, sometimes knowingly, sometimes positively, sometimes unwittingly or negatively. I think the real benefit of shades of bias is being able to deconstruct some of that, maybe when things go wrong, and being able to do that from the three different perspectives that I mentioned. So yeah, the point you make about inherent bias or, you know, conscious bias, it's multifaceted bias, you know, let's face it, and hopefully shades of bias forms part of the solution really in being able to navigate some of that. So thank you. One other thing I would like to say is just to reiterate really that the form can be completed by individuals, it can be completed by teams, it might be as part of a peer discussion. It's sometimes completed by organisations, which I'll come on to later on in the presentation, in terms of organisational evaluation and integration of some of the values that we've talked around as well. It really is quite flexible and universal in how it can be applied. Okay, I'm going to move on. We have quite a bold advertising campaign for Shades of Bias. This is one of the first adverts that we produced for it. The adverts are intentionally supposed to encourage the viewer to form their own interpretations, really, of what shades of bias means to them. So I'm going to talk to you about the origins and where shades of bias originates from. It's a case study template that was developed by myself, the Black and Ethnic Minority Professional Symposium, or BPS, the Professional Capabilities and Development Group, which is also known as the PC&D Group, the Anti-Racist Movement, or ARM, and School of Shabs. So that team of people came together and produced Shades of Bias following concerns raised by Black and Global Majority BASW England members, including practice educators who reported racism with students and organisational practices, students themselves who reported racism in social work placements and academic settings, and newly qualified social workers who encountered racism in recruitment, everyday practice, career progression, and workplace cultures. These concerns were escalated through BASW and our England committee, and representations were made to key stakeholders and partners across social work. We highlighted systemic racism in social work education, early career pathways, and relevant regulatory frameworks. The development of Shades of Bias also coincided with the publication of the Child Safeguarding Review Panel report called It's Silent, Race and Racism and Safeguarding Children. And that report highlighted a lack of accountability in addressing racism in safeguarding practices. Shades of Bias is also informed by BASW's Code of Ethics that I mentioned earlier on, Social Work England's professional standards, and the Social Care Workforce Race and Equality Standards, the Social Care RES. Shades of Bias is also a logical progression from the Anti-Racism in Social Work Activities report that we published in 2021. And finally, the lack of tangible reforms on anti-racism in social work underscored the need for a practitioner-led tool that empowers individuals to document and challenge all forms of discrimination in all settings, hence the conceptualisation of the template. Shades of Bias is part of a wider Hearts and Minds campaign to promote social justice in social work. So that slide really is just to give you some context and understanding of how Shades of Bias came about and some of the key drivers for it. Again, I'll pause at this point for any questions or comments.
We've got Cherry with her hand up.
Good morning.
Hello.
Just for context, I'm the strategic HR business partner for adults, so I'm not a social worker, but I'm very interested in this topic, obviously. So I'm interested in this toolkit. Apologies, I missed the first 5 minutes of the call, so you may have covered this. Is this a tool that is predominantly used within the workforce, or is it something that can be used to reflect on things that might be happening, bias that might be experienced by social workers in the community with the work that they do?
Thanks for your question, Sherry. Shades of Bias is universal and flexible enough to be used professionally and personally by the user. So yeah, pretty much any scenario inside or outside of work, really. From a HR perspective, which I think you mentioned is your remit, I do talk later on in the presentation about how it might be applied there, but just whilst we're on that, it could be utilised as part of a complaint, for example, or a disciplinary procedure, part of supervision or staff appraisals, team meetings. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments from anyone?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that having said all this, it's just good to recognize that use of one of our key modules have been represented for, betting this, because the use of emotional intelligence framework, which, we recognize the self-awareness and everything, and the infusion of the outside waves and all that. So I will say that I just comment the toolkit, because immediately it was shared, I just went straight and I was able to see that, yes, I could see some of, the practice, the framework being embedded into the toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you from me. Sounds like you're a strong advocate of Shades of Bias, so thank you for your support. All right, so just moving on, I would just like to share with you how Shades of Bias can be utilised more widely, which fits in with the question from Sherry and others as well. So these aren't exhaustive, these suggestions, but just looking through the lens of policy, practice and education, these are some of the ways in which it might be used. So in terms of policy, It can be used as evidence in consultations to inform policies on community relations, workforce equality, and social work education. It provides anonymised case studies that policymakers can use to develop social justice strategies. And it aligns with initiatives like the Social Care Res to collect data and track patterns of discrimination, oppression, and racism. One other thing I'd like to just mention there is that shades of bias could also be integrated into policies and procedures within organisations, and there's a number of different organisations that we're working with who are looking at embedding it at that sort of level, really. So it really depends on what the appetite is, either in the individual user, the team or group of users, or the organisational users, if that makes sense. Yeah. So just moving on. Shades of bias can shape social work practice by being used by professionals in their general practice, supervision, and working directly with people. It helps professionals assess their own decision making and recognise patterns of discrimination, oppression, and racism in service delivery. It also serves as a continuous professional development tool that enables professionals to document their learning and improvement in ethical practice. And finally, in terms of social work education, universities and other higher education institutes and training providers can integrate shades of bias into programme delivery and student support to educate, empower and equip them. Students can use it to document their experiences, ensuring their concerns and learning about bias and discrimination are recorded for them to use as and when necessary. And it supports practice educators in assessing students fairly and equitably whilst being mindful of their own needs and bias that may affect their practice. So hopefully you can see there from the origins of shades of bias and the factors that drove it, how we've sought to address some of those things really in terms of how it can be used and applied. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Okay, I don't think there are any. Hopefully I'm making sense then. So I shall move on. I mentioned before there's a section specifically for people responsible for bias. And what they can gain is accountability, growth and self-reflection. This section of the form supports individuals who've engaged in biased, discriminatory or oppressive actions or behaviours, whether knowingly or unwittingly. It has a structured, non-punitive approach to reflection, helping individuals take responsibility, learn and commit to anti-discriminatory, anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice. And the focus, just to emphasise that, is really on it being non-punitive and inviting that self-reflection. So why might somebody engage in that? Well, hopefully to recognise and understand personal biases, to acknowledge and address the harm caused, to align with professional ethics and regulatory expectations, to contribute to a culture of accountability and systemic change. And when completing a shades of bias case study, people responsible for bias should focus on, and I'm not going to go through each of these verbatim, but the main headings are understanding your actions, the impact on others, systemic and organisational influences. Again, the prompts there aren't exhaustive. There may well be other things that spring to mind just to get people started, really. We also have then commitment to change and the ability to repair and move forward. Shades of bias encourages honest self-reflection, as I was saying before. So this process can be completed anonymously to promote openness. People might use it privately, they might use it as part of a process, they might use it in some of those team or organisational settings that I mentioned before as well. It can be supported through professional supervision or group discussion, and it should be used as a developmental tool rather than a box-ticking exercise. By engaging meaningfully, people responsible for bias can move beyond defensiveness to take responsibility and contribute to their personal and professional growth that prioritises justice, equality and ethical practice. And I must reiterate that we start from the standpoint of everybody inherently being either victims or survivors of bias, being witnesses or observers, and at times being perpetrators or people responsible for bias also. Any thoughts on any of that, anyone? does it make logical sense? Is there anything where people think, well, I don't quite, get that bit or whatever? Sherry, I can see you've got your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but I think this is really challenging, isn't it? I mean, I guess from a profession who are very reflective anyway, I can see how social work may be more open to this approach, but certainly wider, I think this could be really challenging to take that first step. So I don't know if you've got any kind of experience or any suggestions around how we might encourage that first step for a perpetrator to come forward to consider this as an option for reflection and growth.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sherry. Yeah, firstly, I would encourage people to view the exemplars that we have on the Shades of Bias webpage, which give examples of the form being completed from the 3 different perspectives. So yeah, in terms of people responsible for bias, there is an exemplar related to that on the webpage. That gives some idea of the type of self-reflection, the level of self-reflection that somebody might, demonstrate. Because it can be used privately, also, I think it's important that people recognise it's there should it be needed. Should something be pointed out, for example, by a colleague or a family member that, they feel that you may have been, found to be biased or discriminatory, or you might even be accused of something that you think initially, well, no, I'm not. You might initially refute it. But actually, in order just to have a thought process, even privately, I think Shades of Bias could be useful in that regard. And the other answer to that question that I thought of was around the integration of it within organisations so that it can hopefully positively influence workplace cultures. If it's embedded in policies and procedures, then, if people are encouraged to use it, or in some cases mandated to use it, they might actually see the benefits of it beyond just kind of, tick box kind of form. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think we've got another hand up there.
Yes, that's me, Wayne.
Hi,
Carolyn. Hi. Yeah, it's a comment really rather than a question, and it sort of leads on from the conversation with Cherry in a way, because it is going to take a lot of courage to use this. I think psychological safety, the culture within an organisation, feels to me that it's absolutely fundamental for this to be used in the way that it's intended, and you've popped, yes, it is on the bottom of that slide. It should be used as a developmental tool rather than a tick box exercise. Yeah. And yeah, that psychological safety to me is absolutely fundamental. I was also going to just comment on, I really like repair and move forward, that it feels hopeful to me.
Yes.
That progression rather than as being stuck. And just social workers, there's quite a lot of us that can get stuck in reflection. So I like that this is taking us to moving forward.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. And I would agree in terms of psychological safety. Yeah, it's absolutely paramount, really. And so earlier on in the presentation, I talked about wellbeing resources and support that people might utilise alongside Shades of Bias. But also it's important that the workplace culture and setting really accommodates that. And like I say, policies and procedures is one way, but actually, voluntarily utilising it within team meetings perhaps, or supervision, appraisals, or when incidents arise, that's another way as well. So thank you for that. Oh, and also just in terms of the repair aspect, that directly relates to the slogan for Shades of Bias, which is reveal, reflect and repair, which is the psychological process that, we encourage people to underpin when they use the template. So thank you. Any other thoughts? I don't have a huge amount left, but I'll take you through the remaining slides. So to summarise, Shades of Bias is a reflective framework for humanising people's lived experiences, promoting accountability and growth, and informing policy reforms. By embedding Shades of Bias in policy, practice and education discussions, we can challenge discrimination, oppression and racism, amplify marginalised voices, and create a profession that is truly committed to social justice. The hope is that Shades of Bias becomes conventional and always usable during incidents of social injustice. And that's the link there to the Shades of Bias webpage at the bottom. Mentioned before that there's a bold advertising campaign. This is one of the other adverts that we have. Just give you a moment to have a look at that.
I'm trying to read what it says on the red sign right at the back.
It says reveal, reflect and repair.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Bit small though, isn't it?
I clearly need some new glasses.
It's a bit tiny. Thought I'd seen another hand go up there, but I may have imagined it. If not, I shall move on. Here's another infographic, and this outlines the content again in a slightly different way. We've really tried to appeal to people's visual preferences and their learning styles and so on. So I hope this infographic is helpful as well.
I'm really curious about witnesses, observers, because I'm just thinking from my own experiences, in practice and outside of work as well. Actually being a witness or an observer, it can feel a very difficult place to be. And often lots of dilemmas and tensions, and sometimes not knowing what to do, how to respond. I think it's really useful that witnesses and observers are brought into the model. So,
and that paragraph there captures how people might go about that, what they can gain, the benefits of using shades of bias in that way. And as you say, it's not an easy position to be in. And so, there's scope for people to use shades of bias privately, for that to just inform their thinking and for them to process maybe what they've observed or witnessed. Or it may even be the sort of starting point for them in taking action, but of course doing the necessary reflection before they do that.
Yes. I guess again for me it brings up courage. That is absolutely crucial, isn't it?
Definitely. If it's to be used as part of a process or publicly. If not, if it's going to be used privately, then perhaps less courage is needed in that scenario. It would just be more self-honesty, really, and I suppose a commitment to introspection.
Yes. Thank you.
That's been helpful. So let me move on. So as I said before, the adverts really are to hopefully give people a very multi-dimensional view of shades of bias and what its purpose is, what it hopes to achieve, and the different uses that it has. Okay, and last advert, a degree of satire in that advert, but again, hopefully it resonates. Sherry?
Just wondering if the adverts are copyrighted. So could this be used as a tool internally if we were sort of to promote a discussion or kind of awareness? Can we use that internally, or is this something that...
Most definitely. There is a dedicated Shades of Bias webpage. There are adverts as well as lots of other resources on there, including the template, of course, and the different versions of that. So it's a bit busy, the webpage, admittedly. But there's lots on there, and I would say please use that as freely as you would like, personally and professionally. And yes, the adverts, I think, can be a useful topic to generate discussion primarily, but then lots of other things behind that as well. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat, Wayne, which you may not have seen. Right. Julie has asked, will BASW, from the data they collect from the forms received, continue to highlight where gaps may be under the Shades of Bias framework, or where more work might need to take place?
We currently have a survey actually, which is, again, there's a link to that on the webpage for people to send in their feedback. There's lots of events like this that we're doing as well, where people are thankfully sharing, really positive feedback. In terms of continuing to refine Shades of Bias, we don't believe it's infallible. It certainly has its flaws, as do all frameworks. Some people might find it quite convoluted, for example. But hopefully through adapting it, the Word version, they might be able to, condense it in a way that is manageable for them. But I'm sure there will always be a sort of continuous refinement of it. But because it is adaptable, it's not something I think that we'd be looking to kind of change frequently. because actually people can just utilise it and make it their own. And because it is as inclusive and as universal as it is as well, hopefully it lands that way for people who use it as well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, I don't think there's any other comments there. I've just got a couple more slides. I said I'd talk about other BASW England work streams, frameworks and resources that were relevant. So that's just a collage of some of those. I hope some of those are familiar to some people in the room. If not, then hopefully there's stuff on there that might pique your interest. And again, a lot of that stuff is available on the BASW website, or if you do a Google search, it should come up quite easily. Are there any other work streams, frameworks or resources that people are familiar with, just out of interest in this group? Anything that jumps out?
Quite a few there. So I went straight into research and practice, skills for care. So I'm working my way around all of them. Then there's Frontline. Yeah. Wayne's Weekly. That's that's what I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Great. Oh, and Outlanders as well, the book.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah. Fabulous. Thanks, Carolyn. Nice to see that you've supported the work. So thanks very much.
Learning and Development had quite a number of copies that were given out to, I think it was newly qualified social workers a while ago. So I have a copy here myself, not so newly qualified, but yeah.
Ah, thanks, great.
Really good book.
Fabulous, thank you. Okay, so I'll not dwell on that slide, but you will get your copy of this presentation, so you'll be able to look through it all in more detail, as I said earlier. Thank you for listening to my presentation and engaging. I've really appreciated it. I hope you got something from that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wayne. Any last minute questions? Because, Sharon. Do you want to come in, Sharon?
It's only a quick one. I think today was a good kind of starting point for these conversations, and I completely agree. Sometimes being witness to things can be quite difficult. Although I think most of us have been trained to speak up and do the right thing. But I was just thinking it'd be really good if you came back and looked at maybe how those conversations are going.
Yeah, that's something I think I would be interested in down the line for sure. So Amanda and other colleagues, do keep me in mind, and BASW. Yeah. Thanks, Sharon.
I think it's a really good suggestion, Sharon. And, we want to look at how we use the tool in a really meaningful way. So yes, I do think following up would be really helpful, and seeing how we all are with it, how we've progressed.
Yeah, that'll be really good.
You. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. Morning, Wayne. Thanks for answering my question just before. I guess from what you've said, and obviously how the Shades of Bias framework is to be used and discussed, I think, and also linked with the previous question, I wonder how we would understand how our conversations overall are improving, and how that's then linking in with not just the workforce, but also those who are on university courses, college courses, doing their social work training and being on placements, but also then looking at the figures for newly qualified social workers who are, again, also experiencing that bias or racism, and how that influences maybe the decisions around them passing their portfolios or that time as a newly qualified or a student. So is there work going to be around that as well?
Firstly, thank you for your appreciation of Shades of Bias and how it could be utilised, recognising that. In terms of future evaluation with Shades of Bias, it's still very much in its infancy, in that it was launched only in May, and there's been quite a lot of traction since then. So although we have the survey online at the moment, that's probably the only strand of evaluation that we have at the moment. But naturally, it will need to be evaluated, and we will try to do that in a rigorous way. But I guess at this early stage, I don't sort of want to overpromise and underdeliver.
That makes sense.
So yeah, I guess the survey for the moment will be our primary source of evaluation. So I would encourage people to fill that in, please, and that will certainly help shape Shades of Bias in the future. But like the other question that was asked as well, in terms of refining it, because it is so adaptable, I guess we would just ask people to adapt it where they feel it's necessary for them. And if there is a gaping hole, that they might then also share a feedback form with us or complete the survey and let us know what that gaping hole is as well. But fingers crossed there won't be any gaping holes. So thanks, Julie.
Thanks for answering.
I guess following on, Julie, from your question, obviously it's still fairly new, as you said, Wayne, and you know, in Somerset we need to consider, you know, how we use the tool. Obviously, people will use it in their own ways, but I'm just thinking in terms of our policies, our processes, you know, sort of organisationally looking at how we utilise it. And I guess there are some opportunities for us to look at trying to measure that impact. You know, what impact has it had? Not sure how we do that yet. So I'm just sort of thinking out loud, really. But I think that's really important as well. And of course, we'd be happy to, you know, to feedback, Wayne, as well.
Yeah, that would be really helpful and useful. Yeah. And I take the point in terms of measuring, because shades of bias could be used as an evaluation tool, as I mentioned in the presentation. Clearly, it would collate qualitative data as opposed to quantitative. But then I guess, I mean, I'm not a researcher or an academic, I need to admit that right now, but I guess there would be an element of, depending on the number of forms that were completed, let's say, a way to extrapolate the themes from those. And then there would be some quantitative data potentially behind that as well. But I'm sure somebody far more qualified than me would be able to, you know, expand on that. That would be the sort of the bare bones of it, really, that I would suggest.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, yeah,
great. Thank you.
So lots of interesting conversations, I think, that we need to have about how we take things forward, you know, from an adult social care perspective. So
great. So look, that looks like it's all the questions and comments. Thanks again for inviting me to speak at your Carnival of Practice. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you all, so thanks very much.
Really grateful, Wayne, for you taking the time to come and present to us. Thank you so much. I guess you've got a few comments in saying thank you. So really appreciate it. So thank you so much, everybody, and lovely to see you, Wayne. Thank you.
All right, you too. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.